Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, independently. If you're here in the East Coast or West Coast, it's still a good afternoon to the West Coast. Good morning to those following us, and thanks for the few people who have been following us through social media in Hawaii. And also, welcome to those who might be following us in the Azores and, of course, mainland Portugal. This is the continuation of the Luso American Education Foundation Conference, the 46th annual conference of the Luso American Education Foundation. And the theme, of course, is the title Navigating the Future, the Portuguese Diaspora in California. And today's panel, our last panel, our only panel for the afternoon, because it's Saturday and people should be watching sports or practicing sports or going for a leisurely walk or doing a picnic. In the valley may not be a wise idea. It's still warm, but in other parts. And so we only had one, but we had a very, very interesting panel to bring to you today. And just a bit of housekeeping. Tomorrow we continue. The conference continues Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Sunday is actually going to start at 10 o'clock in the morning. And then, of course, Monday it will start at 8 in the morning. Ungodly hour for the here, and then of course on Tuesday just an evening session between 5 and 8:30. So this session is, of course, as I said, our afternoon session called entitled "Navigating the Future: Literary Perspectives in California from Writing to Publishing in the Portuguese American Community." And I want to thank my five guests. They're all friends, and they're all people who have committed to in their writing to the Portuguese American experience in one way or another. This story that we seem to have held on for our own benefit for too long, but I think that others also need to know about the Portuguese American experience. And so I'm going to ask each and every one of my five guests here in the Lose American Education Foundation Conference to take about a few minutes. I'm not going to time anyone, but a few minutes, 4 to 5 minutes, to introduce themselves and to basically tell us a little bit about. We won't go into the literary aspect now, just a little bit about their connection to Portugal, connection to the Azores, connection to the Portuguese American community. And we'll start. The order this is here. So, we should start with ladies first. So, Angela, why don't you kick it off, please?
Always a pleasure to be on one of your panels. So my name is Angela Costa Simões. I was born in Sacramento, California, third generation American born. So my parents and my grandparents were all born here. It was my great grandparents that immigrated. My dad's side from the Azores, Terceira, and then my mom's side from mainland in the Guarda area. And so my family, even though I'm third generation, we stayed very connected to the community. I grew up going to the festas. I've been queen twice, side maid 4 times, marched in a parade every weekend of my life until I think I was 18. So, we belonged to the Luso American Fraternal Federation. I held a couple of offices there. And then, I went off to college, and then right after college, I got a job with PALCUS, the Portuguese American Leadership Council of the United States in Washington, D.C. And then I've remained involved with PALCUS ever since then. I'm not going to say which date that was, but I will say it has been more than 20 years. And beyond that, I danced in a folklore group. My now husband, we were dating at the time, joined folklore groups. I mean, I think I've done everything except be in a band as far as the Portuguese community. So, and I will say it's been a place where I've always felt very at home. I've, in high school, I chose to go to Portuguese dances versus high school dances. I even gave up going to homecoming one year because I'm like, just didn't really who am I going to go with? I'd rather go. And then, at least if I went to the hall, I knew that I'd have dancing partners because it wasn't like a wallflower kind of a situation where all the girls on one side, all the boys on the other. You actually had male friends that you could dance with, and we just generally had a better time. So it's always been a place I've felt very at home, and has defined who I am for a very long time. I would say most of my life. I think anybody that I've even interacted with professionally knows that I'm Portuguese. So yeah, that's I mean, in a nutshell, it's
Sure.
been part of my life
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah, I think you breathe it 24/7 or live it.
Mhm.
And just by the way, even if you don't play a musical instrument, I'm sure you can find a Portuguese band to join. They need members, some of them
Right.
really,
I
really.
think all the clubs, every kind of club
That
needs
way
members right
you
now.
could be really well rounded
Right.
in the Portuguese
I'll
American
tick all the
experience.
boxes.
Melinda, if you could do the same, please, appreciate it.
Yes, of course. My name is Melinda Medeiros. I am second generation. I have my paternal grandparents came from San Miguel and Fiel, respectively, and then my maternal grandfather is from Treseda. So my family came over and stayed in the like 1950s generally. And surprisingly, yes, I did grow up going to festas, but they weren't like my parents were never on the committees. I really, as a teenager, took a more active interest in. I joined the folklore group in my town, and I became festa queen. But it was really like more of my initiative in this attempt to connect to that culture. That of course we always celebrated and recognized, but it was just more of like who we were. We weren't like the festa family, I guess. That was more of me. Then my first major in college at Georgetown University, I was a Portuguese major. I didn't end up finishing, I ended up finishing my bachelor's in English, and then I just finished my MFA in creative writing. And a lot of my writing, unintentionally, I did not set out to write exclusively about the Portuguese American experience, but that is my experience, and that's what many of my essays focused on. So here I am.
Indeed, and we'll talk about your book in a little bit, hopefully. So thank you, Melinda. Anthony Barcelos, one of my favorite fiction writers.
Thank you, Denise. I'm Tony Barcelos. I was born in California in Tulare County. I grew up speaking Portuguese as my first language because I grew up on my grandfather's dairy farm. All four of my grandparents were born on the island of Tereseda. And in particular, my father came over with his parents as a young child. He was just an infant when they immigrated to the US. My mother was born in Southern California. So I'm 1.5 generations in a way, as far as being the offspring of Portuguese immigrants. And it was interesting growing up on a dairy farm. And my brother is still running the operation to this very day. And his grandchildren are participating in that dairy farm. So it's a multiple generation family business, and it's being run very well, and it's a very challenging profession. I did not stay on the dairy farm. I escaped at an early opportunity to go to school and eventually become a math teacher. I am currently the senior faculty member in mathematics at American River College. That's in Sacramento, California. And it was also in Sacramento that I spent some time in civil service and on the staff of the California State Senate. But I've been at American River for a long time, and I am currently in my 36th year as a math instructor. And the rest, I'm sort of an accidental author who is full of admiration for writers. And for me, it was a bit of a diversion and turned out to be slightly more significant than I expected. And just for everyone's information, my mother's maiden name is Borges. So Denise and I have got to be cousins.
Yes, from Praia da Vitória, we have to be cousins. Somehow, indeed. And you're not an accidental writer. And also, he's been 36 years at American River College. As you can see, he probably finished his college degree at the age of 12. So now we'll go to Sam Pereira, who is, of course, I'll just let Sam talk about himself, because I can talk about Sam also for about an hour and a half.
Okay, thank you, Denise, very much. I have some of the same things that the earlier people mentioned, but slightly different take on them. I was born in Los Banos, California, which just about everybody who's not from Los Banos, California loves to make fun of the name of. They give it a slightly different translation than the people of Los Banos do. They make it bathrooms instead of. Anyway, I was born here. I didn't grow up on a farm or a dairy, but most of my friends did. And as a result, I spent a lot of time on those places. I ended up, after high school, going to Fresno State to pursue a teaching degree. And I did that, but in a very roundabout way. I discovered, I went for the teaching degree and a major in English. I did all of that. And along the way, getting the English major, I discovered creative writing and poetry and the force that was poetry at Fresno State, starting with Phil Levine and Peter Everwine, Charles Hanslechek, a number of other people. People that were there at the same time as me as students have gone on to become as famous as I suppose you can become as poets. People like David St. John, Larry Levis, who died fairly young, died at the age of 50. Yesterday was his birthday, so I'm thinking about that. Anyway, I was fairly successful at the writing. So I sat down and I talked to Phil Levine and others, and they said, why don't you pursue a Master of Fine Arts degree? So I did, and I couldn't wait to tell Phil that I had been accepted to a couple of universities. And he said, that's great, but why don't you apply to Iowa? I said, okay. And I got in. And those were two of the most difficult and profound years of my life. I became the writer that I wanted to be. I still wasn't teaching. I mean, I taught a graduate level class, a couple of graduate level classes while I was there, but I left Iowa with the MFA and I didn't really want to teach. So I became, for the next 20 years, the manager, not all that time, but eventually I became the manager of a farm supply store. And I kind of like that. It was just different enough to add to the things that I had done. I know a lot still about some of the things that go into the dairy business. And I know a lot about pharmaceuticals and things like that. They don't do me any good today, except they sort of prop up my ego a little bit. Yeah, I know that. Anyway, I've had several books published. Most recently, a book from 9 Mile Press called True North and Untrue You, which is a difficult title to try to explain, so I won't. Anyway, for now, thank you, everybody, and I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Just quick before we go to José Luís Silva, we have at Fresno State our Portuguese book collection that Sam saw. It was just in the beginning stages then, and it was it's the first bookcase is right outside of the Philip Levine reading room, and I will never forget Sam's Sam's affirmation when we went to see that. He turned to me, he says, "I think Phil would like this. I think Phil would like this," and that made that book stand being there, and that section, all that section will be the Portuguese section at Fresno State Library. Last but certainly not least, José Luis da Silva, who is a colleague, an esteemed colleague, a good friend, one of my best friends in the whole wide universe. José Luis da Silva.
Feeling is mutual. Well, how do I match all these people? I was born in the city of Ponta Delgada under the name of José Luis Neves Pereira da Silva. I did high school in Ponta Delgada, and my love right away was literature and languages. I enjoyed that, and there was easy things for me to study. But I immigrated to the United States with my parents and my sister. And for some strange reason, I wanted to study to be a doctor, medical doctor. Maybe because my uncle was a doctor, he made good money. I figured I'd follow in his footsteps. But I soon realized that wasn't for me. I wasn't into medicine and blood and things like that. So I pursued my heart's delight, which is language, literatures, cultures. And so I studied Portuguese, Spanish, French, and got my credential in my graduate work. And of course, with my luck, my first year of teaching, it was when Prop 13 was passed. And so hiring new teachers was almost an impossibility. So fortunately, I got the job in Tuolumne County at Somerville High School, where I went to teach Spanish, French, and actually even taught a sophomore English class, of all things. I was there for 4 years, but I felt that I really wanted to work with the Portuguese community. Even though I had not lived in the Portuguese community in California, we went to live in Oakland, East Oakland of all places. And that's where my uncle had immigrated to the Oakland Hills. We couldn't afford the Oakland Hills, so we lived in East Oakland. And so after Somerville, I got a job in San Jose to teach at Portuguese and bilingual Portuguese at Burnett Middle School. I did that for 3-4 years. And then I came to San Jose, where I taught in the International Baccalaureate program. I started the Portuguese IB, International Baccalaureate program, taught in the French IB program, which is mostly literature at that time, and also taught Spanish. So I had the 3 languages going. When I retired in 2010, I was teaching only Portuguese. So the program had evolved to that. And even though demographically we were getting less and less Portuguese because the Portuguese community was moving away from the Five Winds Church area, moving towards more affluent areas, we had Hispanic students that came in and replaced the Portuguese students in the Portuguese classes. So it was a wonderful experience as a Portuguese and also a Spanish teacher to be able to deal with teaching Spanish to Hispanic students and teaching Portuguese to Hispanic students. I made it a really good connection, in addition to my teaching of French, of course. So that's it. I retired and don't have that much to say about my writing. If you want, I can talk about that later. But it was, in the community, I've been really involved with the Lisbon American Education Foundation. I was chairman of the board for several years and was president for a couple of years. And once I retired, I started volunteering for all kinds of Portuguese organizations until I realized that, my head was spinning, belonging to so many organizations and committees. So I decided to concentrate on organizations that I thought I could be more effective and that I would actually enjoy most. And that's what I've been doing until the present. But the Lisbon American Education Foundation is really very close to my heart, particularly because, and I say this a lot, because I received a grant from the foundation in 1974, the year of the Portuguese Revolution, to go study in Lisbon for the summer, for a few weeks in the summer. And that allowed me to have enough units to get the special, 10 more units, which allowed me to have a special major in Portuguese at St. Calston Hill, where I was, because they had a minor, but so I was taking all the independent study courses, and those units allowed me to have without the classes that I took with Professor Warren, allowed me to have a BA in Portuguese, and that is something that I used all of my life.
Indeed. And Luís also collaborates with PBBI, a segment that we have in Portuguese called Olhos nos Livros, Eyes on Books, where we try to, separate from what we're doing from the Cagarro Colloquium, this one is more into promoting those who still write in Portuguese in the United States and sometimes are not known throughout. So let's turn a little bit to the theme of the writing and publishing in the Portuguese in California, being of Portuguese ancestry, and we'll start this time with Anthony. We'll rotate everyone. And Anthony, tell us a little bit. You of course are not an accidental writer. You are a good writer, and how did this? Tell us a little bit about your writing experience, from the aspect, of course, of your great book, Land of Milk and Money, and so how did that come about? As you said, you were into, of course, worked in public service, and then, of course, a math professor. But of course, there must have been always something about writing that made this important for you. And how did other than the rich growing up of in the Portuguese American community and families and friends, and how did the story come about? And I always recall the first time we talked about this on television, when I did a television show, and you said that your sister said you're going to get in a whole lot of trouble with this book. So tell us a little bit about Land of Milk and Money and how fiction came to be a part of what you do.
Well, thank you, Denise. Of course, it would be rude of me to dispute with our moderator when he says my writing is not accidental, but there is a strong element of a fluke in all this because, as I mentioned, and as Denise affirmed, I'm a math teacher, and I've been doing this for a very long time, teaching at UC Davis, at Cosumnes River College, and for the longest time at American River College. But several summers ago, it suddenly struck me that I should take my sister's advice, which I don't normally do. And it was a matter of a long string of family gatherings for a very long time during my grandmother's life. She, in Tulare County, could have drawn a circle around her house with a radius of about 30 miles, and all of her descendants, her children and in-laws and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, were in that circle. I was the black sheep because I was up in Davis on the outskirts of Sacramento. But for major holidays, my grandmother would host an event and everyone would be expected. And also, while my grandmother was alive, she could be a peacemaker and keep the internal disputes at a low level because her house was neutral ground. And we eventually found out how valuable that had been. But at various family gatherings, we would swap family stories. And there were a lot of family stories. And I was the raconteur for a lot of them. And occasionally my sister would nudge me afterward and say, these should be written down. These should be written down before we forget them. And so this summer came along and I sat down and started writing a few stories. And I thought, this is a novel-sized story if you put all the pieces together. But at the same time, I don't know what motivated everyone. It is the literal fact that I had a pair of uncles who were always at swords points. I didn't know why there was such a strong internal dispute in the family between them. And I realized if I wanted to tell a story about these Portuguese immigrants in the Central Valley and provide motivations where I didn't know what they had been, I needed to go to fiction. I needed to write a novel in fictional form. And even though it was based on anecdotes from within my family, I needed to change names. I could borrow stories from other families that I knew, but I could situate it all in Tulare County, where so many things happened on the Portuguese dairy farms. And later, when the novel was published, somewhat to my surprise, because Tegas Press at the University of Massachusetts was ready to take my manuscript and whip it into proper form and publish it. They also changed the title. I was calling it Dear Dairy. And my editor said, No. That's too much on the nose. People won't understand it. They'll see Dear Dairy. They won't recognize the pun because they'll see Dear Diary. They won't understand. They'll immediately think it's a novel about the confessions of a teenage girl to her personal journal. And I said, how will that diminish sales? But they changed to Land of Milk and Money, which is a very good title. And after it was published, and yes, my sister warned me when she saw the manuscript. She says, Anthony, she's one of the few people in the world who calls me Anthony. She says, I think you're going to get into a lot of trouble. And after it was published, I had people in the family and from outside the family who knew us all, who said things like, how did you find out about that? Because I was making stuff up. And occasionally it was closer to the mark than I realized. But my good fortune is that Land of Milk and Money is a documentation of how Portuguese immigrants in California's Central Valley worked the dairy industry. And various reviewers said, oh, he describes all these things in detail. Oh, Julian Silva said, I must have done a lot of research. No, Julian, thank you very much, but I was a witness. I was just there. So it recounted these things, and lo and behold, people regard it as a genuine contribution, a piece of literature that tells an important story about the Portuguese community in Central California and pays tribute to people like my grandparents, who were very brave to pull up stakes and travel thousands of miles to a place where they didn't speak the language. I'm just astonished by the bravery of it all. And since its publication, it's attracted a reasonable amount of positive attention, if not a huge amount of sales. And some of it I owe to very unlikely coincidences that I would hesitate to put in a novel, because I happen to be 8th grade classmates with Humberto Freitas. I mean, he and I were buddies a very long time ago, and now he's one of the more famous gentlemen of letters in Portuguese lit. How did I get into this circle? It was just an accident. So, I use the accident word again, Denise. My apologies.
Okay, well, one more time. That's okay. And thank you, Anthony. It's a fascinating story. And we'll turn to, we'll just skip around a little bit. We'll turn to Melinda. Melinda, tell us a little bit about your writing and a little bit about, I know that you have a manuscript ready to be published, part of your work at the MFA, and it's pretty much, I'd love the title, by the way, that you're going to use. Hopefully that'll be the final title. And so tell us a little bit about that. And it's pretty much stories around creative fiction around your Portuguese American experience.
Correct. So my title is Queen of Saudade, A Legacy of Loss and Longing. And again, it surprised me when one of my committee members, when he read my thesis manuscript for the first time, he said, this has to be your title. This has to be your title. And like I said, I had not even intended for it to be so centered on like the Portuguese American experience. But like I said, it's just a byproduct of who I am. So I also like to say my family is the only Portuguese family in California who did not go into the dairy business. My avoo did not like cows. So we went into the poultry business. We had an egg ranch, and not only my avoo, but his brother and his sister and brother-in-law. So we were Madeiras Farms, which did eggs. And then my father branched off, and we had a turkey ranch in Madera, California. So most of my stories all circle kind of around that experience of growing up in the animal agriculture industry, and kind of the stories, the family stories that affected how I was raised and how I viewed the world. And also along with that, like the family trauma, almost all of my relatives had lost at least one child in the Azores before moving here. You know, there was a lot of that loss and longing that was just interwoven into our daily life. And I think also really was a catalyst for this drive for us to assimilate to like Americanism, whatever that was. And for me, I felt like that was such a huge loss. And I think that's why I sought to have a deeper connection with my Portuguese culture. I went to the Azores with my grandparents for the first time when I was 16. I stayed for 6 weeks. And basically ever since then, I've been trying to figure out a way to get back. So till this day, and now I have 3 children of my own, and I married somebody who is not Portuguese, and it is much more difficult to maintain a connection to this culture that I value so much. You know, when you are in a household with mixed cultures, and you are immersed in the busyness of being an American, you know. So anyways, that's kind of my story. And another element of that too is the identity, the loss of identity when you leave certain circles. Like within the Portuguese community, a lot of my like identity, especially Queen, being involved in like folklore clubs, it was also tied intricately with religion. And when you, as some of us do, move away from religion, you also feel like you lose that as well. So yeah, but I'm excited to be back in Portuguese circles. It's been a long time, so I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you, and we're happy to have all of your work that you're doing at Fresno State, and we hope to have we have a gazillion projects, so maybe we can have you belong to a few of those. And thank you, and we're looking forward to it. I think more and more we need more writing, and the Queen of Saudade, Lost and Longing. It's really a wonderful title. I think will be important for the Portuguese American community to look at this from that aspect. I know that you've shared a couple of stories with us, and go ahead.
Yeah, let me interrupt just because that's the title comes from an essay specifically around being in the festa. And what I found, especially looking back on that experience, is and I was fortunate to be able to attend one of the panels yesterday, and when you were talking about education and, you know, increasing education in the Portuguese American community, and the topic of festas was brought up. Anyways, for me, it was exactly like that. It was rituals that I didn't fully understand. I took it upon myself to learn about Queen Isabel, and I include that in my writing because I feel like there is a certain emptiness when you participate in these rituals, but you don't fully understand what it means, and you think like, this is going to anchor me in this culture, but then it doesn't, and it can just be kind of devastating. So I just wanted, that reminded me. So yeah.
No, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And actually, when we get to Angela, we'll talk a little bit because that kind of has a correlation there. José Luis, tell us a little bit about your writing, poetry, but not just poetry. You have essays as well, but poetry essentially. José Luis published, he has one book of poetry published. He probably has another one somewhere that needs to be published. And he also has done translations as well, of especially from Portuguese to English, translated a couple of one work by Alam Oliveira, a biography, and other works as well. And he has, and his first poems appeared in a book called 100 Anos de Poesia Portuguesa na Califórnia, 100 Years of Poetry, of Portuguese Poetry in California, which I would love to have republished by Bruma, because I think, you know, it was important maybe do 150 years of Portuguese poetry in California, because it is about, I don't know, Luis, but it's probably 40 some years old. I would think this book, if not more, probably very close to 150 years now. And I think that it would be interesting to include, because you were a very young man. I mean, you were just, you know, so it would be interesting to include those poets that Dr. Mayam Diaz included and Donald Warren, and also the ones that have published in the last 30, 35 years. And it's a wonderful piece of literary history of the Portuguese presence in California. So Luis is one of the featured poets.
Well, what can I say? I'm not a prolific writer. I write once in a while. I started writing very young. My first poem, I was 10 years old. And then through my teenage years, I wrote quite a bit. And then when I came to America, I felt the need to put in paper what I felt and what I saw. And I've always felt this almost need to document from within the experience of an immigrant, because the people are born in this country, Portuguese Americans, and there are people that I stay in Portugal and don't know the experience of being an immigrant is. So I wanted to put that in paper into a feeling, to a poetic feeling, and that's been there, together with the idea of what it is to be Portuguese, no matter where. Portuguese, what it means to be Azorian, and I think they're similar, but they're not the same. We Azorians have certain feelings and attitudes and imagery that you may not find all over Portuguese literature. I actually grew up in a milieu that was very leaning towards literary. My grandfather had studied agronomy, and that's what he did professionally, but he was really an encyclopedic mind that he actually was teaching Portuguese literature in a private high school in Delgado. And so his whole family, 10 kids, learned poetry and recited poetry. My mother did, my aunts, mostly 19th century, early 20th century poets. Janet Quintal was a standing figure in our house, because you know where he's from. And there were others, João de Deus and all that. So I grew up with kind of an older type of Portuguese literature. But then on my own, I discovered the more contemporary writers, and all through high school, that's what I did. When I had to study physics and chemistry, often I put the book aside and read a poem. That's how much I enjoyed it. So coming to California, I must say that my adjustment to California was never easy, because I did not live in the Portuguese community. As I said, I lived in East Oakland. I did not have the experience of most immigrants coming into the valley or to San Jose, someplace like that. So I had to discover myself in this new world and this new society. And the few things that I've written, several of them have to do with that, and also the disintegration of our identity. One of my poems entitled New Silicon Valley, in Silicon Valley, has to do exactly how we as a people, at least me and the people around me, would dissipate into this culture, which is magnificent in terms of technology. But the registers, the existence that we have bringing with us from centuries of existence, mostly in the Azores, that dissipates in this world in here where almost nobody knows anybody, and we become more or less a number into things. So it's not the same thing as in Terceiro or in San Miguel, where you walk down the street, everybody knows who you are, your uncle is, your cousins, everybody. Well, here, I live in Fremont. If I walk down the street, most of the people here are Asian, and they're immigrants too. They don't have connections with I am, and it was like that in other parts. So I try to use my little literature as a I wouldn't say defense mechanism, but as a way to guard my identity and to adjust to this new world, and to also register as a document what it is to immigrate and to leave everything behind, and be part of a new society. And I always felt that because I had come with some education from Portugal in the Portuguese language, that I had a duty to do that, because many of the immigrants did not have that kind of preparation when they came here, and that kind of enjoyment of literature, and I would say, without being pompous, that knowledge of the Portuguese literature, that I had a duty to put it all together and show, at least in my small, narrow-minded way, how it was to be a Portuguese immigrant in California. And
your poetry does that very well. Let's see, Sam, your poetry, of course, your writing, as you said, it began, at Fresno State. It continued. It has been part of your life, even though when you were doing something else other than teaching. But it's been part of your life. You've been publishing books. The Marriage of the Portuguese is a wonderful book, but all of them are. I have all of Sam's books, and I like each and every one of them. And so, Sam, how, and I know I've asked you this before, but I think it's good to reflect with this audience. How, yeah, I know that sometimes you just write good poems, and if they happen to have a Portuguese tone to them, so be it. But a lot of them do, and some of the ones that sometimes I read, for those of you who are friends of Sam on Facebook, and if you're not, you should be. You get this wonderful poem first thing in the morning. I mean, it's even if you wake up at 5, it's already there. And not every day, but many days, and he shares them with us, and then of course he takes them out because he's going to work on the poem and everything else. But you are indeed an American poet, but your poetry is very much touched by the Azorianness that was part of your family in one way or another, especially when you were younger. Lots of memories of that, and you've been able to create some wonderful contemporary poetry, even with Fernando Pessoa, and the most magnificent poem that you have, many others as well. Os Açúcares, as I translated, Os Açúcares da Terceira. And so all of these images that you have, these obviously you write about them because they are part of who you are, right? Or how does it, an American poet, but with an Azorian flair for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And by the way, before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge that it's nice to know that you're the guy that bought all the books. I always wondered about that. Anyway, I grew up, my mother wasn't Portuguese. She was from Texas. My father and all of his brothers and sisters and my grandfather had long since passed, but they lived in the same town. And we ended up at my grandmother's house probably a couple of times a week. And everybody there, with the exception of me and my mom, spoke Portuguese. So I guess I developed an ear for the language. Unfortunately, I didn't learn the language, and it's still something that bothers me to this day. But I also got a sense of I hate to use the word saudade again, but there is that cloud that's there no matter where you go. And it became part of me too. And I'm grateful. I'm delighted, if that's the right word. It is for me. I didn't know what to do with all that stuff, though. I mean, I was essentially I started writing seriously when I was 17. And I was basically, I thought of myself as, an American writing about America. And I didn't realize that all that stuff was underneath. The first book, The Marriage of the Portuguese, again, like you were saying, Denise, even in that book, it's not strictly centered on the Portuguese experience, but that's where they began to come out a little bit. The title, The Marriage of the Portuguese, is from a poem that basically wrote itself in a matter of 15, 20 minutes. And that was the beginning of it. I was like, I think 19, something like that when I wrote it. Since then, I've learned, I think, how to balance the two, because I don't want to give up either one. And there are times when writing a poem with certain elements of Portuguese background are necessary parts of the poem. I've never been to the Azores or Portugal. There was a time when I thought I would, but I'm 73 now, so I'm beginning to think that's probably not going to happen. But I feel like I'm very much a part of it. So I suppose I have the events that take place in my poems, even the early ones and now the later ones, come out of a manufactured, a creative, a fictionalized, to use Anthony's terminology earlier, sense. I mean, I didn't know many of the people and the stories that my family was talking about all those years. So I gave them a personality of their own. An example, I had a very colorful, shall we say, uncle who would come to visit us every so often from San Jose, I believe. And he was mysterious. I mean, nobody really knew much about him. But when I wrote the poem about him, I made him even more mysterious because that was kind of my job. And I hope he wouldn't mind. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but
sure, it did, and very well, it did. Angela, in your situation with children's literature, which is something that's much needed in the Portuguese American community, we are just used to having children's literature that is Portuguese children's literature, and then somebody translates it to English, but sometimes that doesn't have the same situation because the stories are Portuguese stories. You know, the story, so you've taken some of the popular stories, like going to a festa, like the Galo de Barcelos from our aspect. I know you're working on the Queen Isabel, and that is something that was leading up to what Melinda said. You know, I think that children's literature can bring to children, because your stories are bilingual, most of them, I think they are, you have them then translated.
Mhm.
So they not only give the Portuguese American perspective, but they also give an opportunity to learn some Portuguese, because you can learn some Portuguese by having a bilingual book. And then by the same token, they give that story that, like Melinda said, you know, and one of our panelists yesterday, you know, when you become, you know, you're the side mate to the little queen, you know, you're 9 years old, you hear about this and you have no idea what you're doing there. But through children's books, now there's a possibility to learn about that, you know, at a very young age. That, of course, you know, it's, you know, then the complexities of the festas can be added on, you know, in high school and with some of the other writings that are being done at more of an advanced age. So tell us a little bit about how this came about. I know the story, but everybody else doesn't. How this came about, writing children's literature, and how that's been an important part of what you do.
Sure. So I think, like a few people on the panel here, never anticipated becoming a writer in any way, shape, or form. I do public relations as my profession. But being third generation Portuguese American, I'm not fluent in Portuguese. We didn't grow up speaking it at home. And then my husband he is first generation. He only spoke Portuguese in the home. And when we got married and had kids, we knew that we wanted our daughter to learn Portuguese. So he went to Portugal, got a bunch of kids' books, brought them home. But I would try to read them to her, and I didn't know what I didn't know what they meant. And it's like, I can't even understand a kid's book in Portuguese. Like, that's how bad my Portuguese is, right? So I thought, well, you know, gosh, if it was in Portuguese and English, at least I could figure it out and then learn along with her. So I started looking for bilingual children's books. And there were a few out there, but they were either from the Brazilian perspective, or they were a little bit older, and our daughter was very young. She was like not even a year at this time. Or frankly, they were just kind of weird. Like, I didn't like the illustrations. I thought the story was kind of odd. And so I thought, why wouldn't I just write one? And I'll write it for her. and then I'll have one, and then it'll be done. And so I called it Linda Menina, and literally it was like based on our morning routine, our life together, right? I wake up in the morning, bon dia, minha linda, you know, you're so beautiful, and just all these positive affirmations that we would tell her every day. So we published the book, and I was very thankful also to work with my friend Elia Borges Souza as the illustrator. She was willing to take a chance. She's, you know, said, I've never done people before, but, you know, willing to help you out. And then the book layout was done by Angela Silveda Lanes. So all of my books are completely done, with the exception of a few translations that you've done, thankfully, for me, Denise, by Portuguese women, which I'm kind of very proud to say. So
But I'm pro-feminist, so okay.
Yes, yes. So we published that one, and all of a sudden, I mean, the response was very positive. And then boy moms said, well, what about a boy book? Right? So we did a Linda Menino version. And then it just sort of occurred to me that I guess there's a need, like I'm not the only one looking for these kinds of books. And so we did Números, Cores e Fruta, very simple book that taught counting fruit and colors. So, you know, três morangos vermelhos, right? That kind of thing. And then I can't remember the exact kind of path, but you know, things just sort of occur to you and you think, well, if I did that one, I think I could probably do another one. Well, what would I write about? Well, there isn't any book about the festa. I could write about when I was a kid at the festa, right? And so then you start writing, and again, it's very simple, but it turned out to be really fun because going to the festas as a kid, I mean, we loved going. We looked forward to it. You know, you sing your cousins and you go to the dance and you're running in and out of the Shambajita circle and marching and I mean, just everything about it we loved. And so it was a very big part of it. And I saw that there was no story that really portrayed that experience, right? So then, again, one thing leads to another, and you know, we have roosters all over our house, the way that I think most Portuguese do. And one day, my daughter asked why that rooster is painted that way, or why do we have roosters? Oh, well, there's a story. Did you not know the story? So go to Amazon or go online. Let's find to see if there's a book. You know, there's plenty of websites that have the story kind of, you know, laid out, but there was no book. Hey, I guess I'll write the book. Oh, there we go. And so for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment that said, I don't think that these little stories, these little legends that we grow up hearing about are documented in a way that's friendly for kids, right? And so like you said, if you're 9 years old and you're marching in this parade and you're wearing a crown and you're carrying a crua, like, why am I doing this? And, you know, it's funny because I remember going to a festa once and somebody saying, I bet you if you asked any of these girls what, you know, who they represent, they're not going to have any idea. And they were like really upset about it. And I thought to myself, well, I mean, someone could tell them. We could take it upon ourselves to tell them the story. So now, yeah. So what we have in the works is a book about Reina Santa Isabel and why we march in her honor and what it means. But then if you think about it, there's so many other little things like the manjerico, right? What does that mean? And why do people give manjericos to each other, you know, in the summer? The song Uma Casa Portuguesa, I grew up singing that, right? I didn't always know what the words meant, but I grew up singing it. So what if we really put effort into handing down these legends, these stories, these parts of our culture? Otherwise they are going to get lost, or maybe they'll get diluted. And all of a sudden, you know, the Galdo Barcelos legend, you know, is completely changed in some way. So I just, there just seemed to be an opportunity there to fill a gap. And, you know, I don't know that any of us are getting rich off any of this. I know I'm not. So it's really more of a passion project, right? It's a thing that we do because we see a need and we love it. And hopefully we leave a bit of a legacy behind. And in my case, that parents will appreciate having a source, because sometimes I wonder if, maybe some parents are like, well, I think this is the story, but I'm not quite sure. Like, I think I remember hearing my grandmother say it this way, but I'm not sure. Now they can be sure, right? And, I did a radio interview about the Barcelos book, the Gala Barcelos book. And the interviewer said, it's interesting how, the version that you told, because there's differences depending on, I guess, who you hear the story from. And I said, yeah, I mean, a couple of versions I read had the guy, sentenced to murder or sentenced to death because he committed a murder. I'm like, that wasn't too friendly for a children's book. So we softened it a bit, right? So there was some softening, there was some creative license there. But again, it's a resource for parents, and hopefully they'll use them to relay these parts of our culture to their kids, and their kids will grow up learning and maybe be inspired to be like Melinda and take it upon themselves, which I have to say, kudos to you, Melinda, for having the initiative to get interested and want to be part of the festas and want to be part of the folklore, because I feel like, having been on the other end, we're begging people to do. So, put a bench to you for that. And so, yeah, hopefully parents will appreciate it as a resource and pass them on, and they will, and then kids will appreciate them because they'll be like, oh yeah, I read this as a kid, and, that kind of thing. So that's,
Sure. And I think
what's going-
children's literature is very important, especially in all communities. I think it's very important in our community because there's lots of stories that need to begin to appear in a children's books, so then they can understand it when they're older and read a
Mhm.
poem by Sam, or
Mhm.
a fictional piece by Melinda or
Right.
Anthony, or a poem by Jose Luis. They can now, if they don't know anything about it, if they've never heard of it, then the adult literature won't make that much sense, or they'll have to go research about it. We need to have more and more children's books about the Portuguese American experience and about the Portuguese experience itself. So kudos to you. And I've told you this before, and I'm grateful for what you do. I want to turn to our last question, because we don't want to go. We promised you'd be done by 2:30, and it will be. So and first of all, with Angela, I just want to make this one comment, because what Angela said about some of the stories not being very friendly towards a infantile audience, and some of them aren't. I mean, our first book at Bruma Publications that we hope to have it. I was very naive when I got into this. I thought we could publish the book in 6 months. You are right. And so it's now been 9 months, and it will probably be another 2. But it's actually, I can announce to everybody, the book is already typeset. I mean, it's ready for typesetting. It's going to be published in Portugal, in the Azores. It's easier to do it that way, and then it's going to be transported over here. The price difference between between printing it there and here, oh my gosh, it's like night and day. And so and Letras Lavadas in São Miguel, Nova Gráfica, that José Luís Silva knows, Senhor Ernesto, is just really very good quality stuff. But anyway, so our first book is the Portuguese Folk Tales in California, which is a scholarly work done by Manuel Costa Fontes. It was part of his doctoral dissertation. He collected from, I believe, 18 different people in the valley, different stories that they were telling their grandchildren. Okay, and it's interesting how they were telling these stories to their grandchildren. This was from the late 1970s when he did this work, and but it already included some American nuances. I mean, it was like it had some of the American nuances stories to it, but some of them are. We are working on a second project, which is taking those stories and putting them in children's books. So maybe picking 5 of them and putting them in children's books, bilingual with some illustrations. Our linguistics department is working on that, but a couple of linguistics teachers said, we have to change some of those things. Is the author okay with it? Yeah, he doesn't care. He's okay with it. We can't say this kind of stuff, it's okay because it's a scholarly book, but not for a children's book. And it reminds me, and very, very quick, this song that I know that José Luís knows, and probably some of you have heard it, the Sebastião. Sebastião come tudo, tudo, tudo. Sebastião come tudo quanto quer. Sebastião é grande barrigudo, chega a casa, dá pancadas na mulher. So it means Sebastião does everything he wants. Sebastião's a big, a big dude, eats everything he wants. And when he gets home, he kind of does domestic violence. He beats up on his wife. And we had the visit of the president of the government of the Azores. My kids were like 10 and 12, I think. Like 6 and 8. And at the time, João Bosco Motamaral and our choir group is, doing this little thing with the kids, and they're inciting the Sebastião come to. And I said to myself, oh, geez, let's not do that one, because so now it's changed. Now it's Sebastião come tudo, Sebastião come tudo quanto quer, Sebastião é grande barrigudo, chega a casa, it's all the same thing. Arrives at home, dá beijinhos.
I was going to say dar flores or something like that. Yeah.
Dá beijinhos na mulher, kisses his wife.
Mhm.
That's a little bit better than, than the other version. The other version cannot be, of course. So we have to look at those things as well. My last question is in this aspect, and I'll start with Anthony. Is publishing, and of course, when Angela said we're not all getting rich on this, well, Anthony is, because the other day on Facebook he put his royalties that he received from one of the books from a certain amount of time. So I mean, if that's going to give him a trip around the world 10 times. So but indeed that is an issue. Writers need to be paid just like anybody else. It should be, it's a noble profession, and sometimes it's just seen as a noble mission that people shouldn't get paid. But even the noble mission, even the priests in the church have a salary. So I believe that that's a question I wanted to ask. How difficult do you see right now? And publishing is hard. Publishing through university presses is not easy. I can tell you that. One of our issues with Broom is how do we do distribution? Because University Press at Fresno State, and Melinda can tell you, distribution is not the best in the world. So we're looking at ebooks, as Anthony has done. We're looking at, on demand, maybe, through as a way to, through Amazon and some of the other companies. And then, of course, the traditional sense, we're looking at doing more community events. In other words, if we're going to publish a book, we're going to try to do an event in at least 5 Valley towns, and maybe even Northern and Southern California, where we can, sell, hopefully, 100, 200 books, in order to make it viable for what we're doing. But it's a problem. It's a problem publishing. It's a problem distributing. Where none of you, maybe it will happen in the near future. But our good friend passed on, Alfred Lewis, from the wonderful city of Los Banos, as Sam knew, was lucky. I mean, in 1950, he writes a manuscript and sends it to Random House, and they publish it. Now, that's almost unheard of in today's form, because you have to have an agent, and you have to have everything else. So, Anthony, how do you see publishing? With your experience, how do you see publishing in the Portuguese American community? And I hate to use that word because I'm kind of doing it, but we're kind of stuck with university presses in some way, because that's, they will publish. They sometimes, don't have the distribution that we'd like to have. But what are your thoughts on publishing in the future, and what can we do maybe a little bit different in the Portuguese American community to promote these books? Like you were saying, I know we did a book presentation for you here in Tulare, but Land of Milk and Money, we should have had 20 or 30 book presentations. I'm serious, not just Land, Book of Money, The Marriage of the Portuguese, José Luís, and Melinda's future book, and Angela's book. We should do something where we have at least 10 to 15 different book presentations throughout California, the Portuguese American communities, and get the community involved in this, because it's a way to pass it on to other ethnic groups. But your thoughts on it? How, I know it's not the easiest thing in the world, but any thoughts on how we can make this better, and how we can make the promotion of the book, promoting the author a bit better than in just very limited circles?
I think you're going to want to institutionalize it to a greater degree so that people get the idea that, in particular, perhaps with Bruma, since that's a new resource that could fill part of the gap that we've been experiencing. But if people in the Fresno state vicinity were aware that there's a monthly author presentation that is being hosted by Bruma, and it's something that you can put on your calendar for the third Thursday of every month or whatever, so that it becomes a regular occasion, that people start looking forward to it, that it becomes something that you can always fall back on because you know there's another one coming, and you can build a community around that. Having said that, you may be looking to the wrong person for advice on what to do about promoting publications. I did have some very interesting book events, and when I presented Land of Milk and Money in San Francisco, the Consul General for Portugal showed up. So that was a very pleasant surprise when I went back to Massachusetts, which was a rare occasion indeed, since I'm such a poor traveler. Being at the University of Massachusetts, both the campus in North Dartmouth and also the Lowell campus, having those events brought out lots of people. And again, university communities, I think that's a very fertile ground to work on. The fact that university presses are not professionalized to the degree that regular publishing companies are. You have people who are doing it in addition to everything else they do as faculty or staff. They are not 100% devoted to it the way a publishing company's employees are. So can you build that up to the degree where someone is working for a university press whose 100% job is this promotional aspect to get the word out about author events, to recruit authors, to recruit audiences, to get publicity on the air, because there are so many forms of media now, some of which are completely free to use, and it's just a matter of diligence to get it out there. And commercial media is still hungry for news. So if that becomes something that you can promote on a regular basis, if you have contacts at the local radio stations, local TV stations, local press, even though newspapers are increasingly less reliable as news sources, as they, I recently lost my freelance gig at the Sacramento Bee because they stopped covering the musical events that I was covering for them. And so that's a great loss. And so you have to be more creative in seeking out the venues where you can get attention. So getting attention, using the university community, finding a way to get full-time people in the promotional side. I think all of those things might be possible. I don't doubt they'll all be challenging.
Challenging they won't be, that's for sure. Sam, your thoughts on that? How do we promote? How do we change? How do we get more people in the Portuguese American community and beyond to read Sam Paredes poetry?
If I had the answer to that, it would be amazing. But Anthony covered pretty much and beyond anything I could possibly think of. I know I was not the greatest promoter of my work. I've gotten better over the years at doing it. But the idea of a university, a major organization, getting behind something and promoting it. For example, when Tegas Press published the updated version of The Marriage of the Portuguese, that was new to me because there was some major promoting going on that I had never gotten before. At least to me there was. I mean, I don't know how it compares with Alfred's Random House experience, but it needs something. The writer himself or herself can't do it unless they're superhuman beings. I know I can't. I wish I could say more, but I really don't know, Dinesh.
Sure. Yeah, but the need is there, and I think the need is there. Yeah, the need is really there. We just sometimes publish, and then it stays there, and then it doesn't go anywhere. Angela, you of course have a book publishing, for different children's literature, and not only children's literature, Hizu books, but your experience has been more with on-demand kind of, publishing and ebooks. Any ideas on how we can even I'm sure even your books, you would obviously you'd like to have a few more, quite a few more readers. What can we do? And Anthony had a great idea. I think the idea of having a maybe we can't do it every single month because of whatever, but around the campus community, like September, October, November, maybe, and then come back, and do February, March, April, and May, and have that like every third, as you said, every third, whatever day of the month, there is a Portuguese author. And from children's literature to poetry to fiction to essays, we might be able to create, and we could do this with other universities. We could do it with California State University Stanislaus, with those who have Portuguese language programs, and work together with and do maybe a 4 university system, Southern California, to the Valley, and 1 Northern. What are your thoughts on that? How do we get the community? Because then the community can be also a step into other communities that are interested in these books.
Oh, Denise, I have lots of thoughts. Where do I begin? So I think Anthony was really onto something as far as the promotions of the book, the press releases about books, getting media engaged, and having more book launches, that sort of thing. But like you all have said, that takes time, dedication, and, dare I say, an organized committee around that. Now, you may say, but we just had Portuguese Heritage Publications of California, and now they've closed their doors, and what happened there? And honestly, I have no idea what happened there. Though I will say, it seemed like a lot of their focus was on these big, like historic pieces, right? Like to capture and document our community, which are very important. So, and I was never involved with that organization. They did help me publish my first book, the printed version, but I was never like on their board or part of their governing. So
yeah, actually, I think I'd like to, and he can already be thinking about it. I'd like to Jose Luis to cover that because he was on the board,
okay,
and can talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
okay. But if you had a group like that was dedicated to helping authors, maybe they didn't publish the book, right? But if they helped the author, write the press release, they have the database of all the journalists, newspapers, TV stations, organizations, universities, right? That when you have a new book, it gets published, through this list. You put it on the newswire, which is a public newswire. There is a cost for that, though, but you do that. You host monthly or quarterly book fairs. Find halls that are willing to do that kind of thing. The first one for me that comes to mind is Newark Pavilion, because they have some new folks on the board. I don't know how new they are, but they've been doing a lot of new stuff at that hall. In fact, we're doing a Christmas pop-up, at there, and they're not charging us, as an organization, which is PAL because it's putting it on, but vendors pay $30 to have a table. And what's $30? Honestly, it's like such a great deal. So could there be a quarterly book fair at the Newark Pavilion, or one month it's at Newark Pavilion, the next it's at the DES Tulare, the next one it's at UPSES in San Diego, so it kind of like moves through same formats, like rinse, repeat, right? It's the same format, so you don't have to reinvent everything. But I think there's a lot that can be done. It does require some some dedication, some funds. So if you're like me, Denise, the gears are turning. You're like, okay, so it's a new organization. We're going to go ask Flat for some money and get them to pay for this, and all that kind of stuff. But I do also feel like maybe as part of those events, there can be some education on how to publish, because I think there are also a lot of people out there that would like to publish. And I'm helping one author right now publish her book. And I will say it's been a learning experience for me too, because I've never helped anybody do that. And I'm just going based off purely what I have done with mine, right? And you're right, I do the Amazon print on demand, and I'm also now starting to do Ingram Spark because they have a better distribution, right? Like you can actually go on Barnes and Noble website or Walmart's website, and through Ingram Spark, the books are available there. So perhaps as part of these quarterly or monthly book fairs that could be hosted, there's a bit of education as well to help authors figure out, here are your options, here's some best practices, here's how this author did it, and that kind of thing. So I think that would be helpful too. That way it's not just the selling of books, right? And then you also have maybe an author reading poetry or reading an excerpt from their book. There's a book reading, that kind of thing. And maybe it's an evening event, so you have some food and some wine, and I don't know. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that can be done. It's just, it takes a very coordinated effort. And I think you said it, Sam, that you just don't have the time to do it. And I completely agree. Public relations is my profession, and I barely have time to write a press release about my own book, so I totally get it. And I think there is a lot that could be done. But I also feel like and this I don't have the answer to, but how do you get the community more interested in these topics and in a book like that? Is it, do you have a book reading, and then how do you get them to listen to that? Right. I do feel like the more established organizations need to be involved and need to take more of a responsibility to share this kind of information with their membership. So Luso, PFSA, Cabrillo Club, like some of the bigger organizations, right?
Indeed, that's a very good idea.
Because they have those captive memberships, right? That whether it's at their conventions or through their email list or through their newsletters or what have you. I mean, Luso and PFSA have bigger distributions than the Portuguese Tribune, right? So at least I think they do.
No, much bigger.
Because of their membership, right?
By thousands and thousands.
Yeah.
Because I mean, PFSA has 40,000 members. So
right. So I mean, the Portuguese Tribune also should be, we should be sending them information. And I will say they do a very good job.
They do a good job.
But again, we're trying to reach big amounts of people, large amounts of people, right? So, maybe holding some of these organizations their feet to the fire, but also just, and this is maybe where we enlist the help of some of the younger generation and find out, how do we get your attention? Do we have to do a TikTok video about my book in order to get you interested?
Yes, you do.
I mean, then maybe one of the workshops at the book fair is how to do TikTok for your book.
You actually do. I was told that yesterday by the young generation between 17 and 27. TikToks they actually asked for TikToks. It could be on books, authors. It could be TikToks on, for example, something they call influencers, which is a bad name.
Yes.
We'll call it something else. But, Portuguese American that they didn't know, that's teaching, it's a professor of mathematics that we had, at CSU Stanislaus, another one that we have is a professor of mathematics at American River College. You may have heard of him. And so I think that these things because sometimes, and those are important too, we're a little bit off topic, but those are very important. I mean, some kind of a thing that reaches young people that like mathematics, they probably never thought that they could be a mathematics professor. And if Anthony does one, and or Jessica da Silva or some of the others, because we don't have that many mathematics professors that are Portuguese. We do have our department chair at Fresno State who is Portuguese. Chris Myers is Portuguese, and he's our chair for mathematics. So
I mean,
that's
Myers is a
wonderful.
very Portuguese name.
It is, but that's what I told him. But he is Portuguese for his mother side. But those are some very good points. Very good points, Angela. Thank you, Melinda. Your thoughts on that? How do we navigate it? And you know, of course, the university system well, and you know
Yes.
that end of it.
So a lot of good ideas. As far as the university, I would say to tap into any university that teaches Portuguese language or has Portuguese clubs. I myself was the president of the San Joaquin Literary Society at Fresno State while I was doing my MFA, and we were looking for authors all the time to do readings, especially maybe authors who weren't as well known, because we operated on a small budget. So we of course loved to offer honorariums, but we didn't have the budget that a lot of like these bigger well-known authors require. So that would be a way to get into more universities. And I know as a professor myself, I always offer and incentivize going to readings to my students. So if you reach out to these other professors who teach Portuguese classes at different universities and have an opportunity to do a reading, that could be a really good avenue. And also, like, I would say tap the Festa halls. Like, we have all of these halls up and down California who I would imagine and hope that would be more than happy to host literary nights. And also something that my sister and I often discuss, I lament many other cultures, they have like Greek school or Portuguese school, where, you know, maybe once a month, the whole family can go and practice the language, and maybe have an author who's a guest who's Portuguese American, learn a little bit about the culture and the history of the Azores or Portugal, whatever. I think these are really missed opportunities and a way for us to evolve and maintain a connection to our Portuguese culture without it being like the same thing that no longer engages younger people.
Indeed. José Luis, your last thoughts, and a little bit, if you don't mind telling us a little bit. You know, we lost, as Angela said, and we have lost because Anthony, I'm sorry, not Anthony, Tony, he can also be Anthony, but Tony Goulart just told me that I had a conversation with him a few weeks ago, and he has told me that it's completely dissolved. You know, Portuguese Heritage Publications of California no longer exists, and they, you know, they've dissolved the organization legally. You know, everything has been done in that aspect. So, and it's a great loss. I told him that, and you know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. But as he said, the board just got older. They couldn't find replacements, and they were just at a standstill. Had not been very active. That these are his words, not mine. They had not been very active for, you know, the last 3.5 years or so, and it was just time to, you know, there was no direction, you know, occurring. So let's just close it. And he has actually offered to help us, you know, at Bruna Publications, you know, with some ideas and things like that, because they actually do have a couple of manuscripts that we would like to get funding for and publish. And one of them, the manuscript from the Chronicles of Father Ajuda, José Luís, o nosso amigo de São Miguel, o padre Ferreira Moreno, exatamente, Ferreira Moreno, José Ferreira, who wrote diligently for a lot of newspapers, and it would be great to get him published. And he has a manuscript and has offered to us, as long as we, of course, can get some funding. So any ideas, any thoughts? Lots of these things, you know, are some great ideas, but tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that. I know it's hard to sell books in the Portuguese American community. Our good friend Onésimo Tuciono Almeida says it's easier to sell ice to an Eskimo than to sell books to the Portuguese Americans, but I think it's changed a little bit.
Well, Portuguese Heritage Publication did a fantastic job at documenting the presence of the Portuguese in California through a variety of books, from the Holy Ghost to agriculture to the whalers, etc., and also about writers in Portuguese. They did a tremendous job, and they were, but it got to a point where everybody's getting old, sick, and tired, and just you said something, I think it was yesterday, that Father Marta told you it was better to let it die, to kill it than let it die. Yeah. So that was I think we did basically that, because the organization had assets and had done a lot of things, and a lot of books. And rather than just let it fill away and not knowing where it was going, we put an end to it. And under the leadership of Tony and Briggs and others, and distributed the assets the way they could, and moved on. And I sincerely hope, and I've made this point with Portuguese Heritage, I sincerely hope that a lot of the tradition and the assets of the Portuguese Heritage can go on to Bruma Publications, because there's nothing else out there to replace it. One thing that Portuguese Heritage Publication did that was successful then, may not be successful now, but whenever there was a publication of a book, there was a big event at, say, the Portuguese Atlantic Club in San Jose, a dinner. And this dinner would have like 200-300 people, because most of the writers knew a lot of people, and there was a milieu that allowed for that. And in the price of the dinner was included the price of the book. So right there, you have 200-300 people come in, they sit down, they get a book, you sell the book, and you have a nice dinner. Now let's take a look at something. It was kind of touched in here a little bit before. Portuguese American community, they don't go anywhere unless there's food and wine and some music in it. So one suggestion, maybe to implement this sales and distribution of these books, is to have an event at a place. Maybe we can't have a hall and do a grandiose thing, but what about having in a restaurant, different places in the state where we have a Portuguese literary night, we'll present some books, you have some authors, you have some good food, some decent wine, at least good wine, and some music. It doesn't have to be Marisa does not have to come to sing, but some good community culture event mixed up with that. I really believe that literature can be, for many people, can be dry. So you need to make it more appealing. Words with a little taste of something, may not even be Portuguese food. It could be seafood or something like that. Include it, put it all together, sell it as a package, include a book in it, and let's see what happens. And not have it only in one place, go to Larry one time and somewhere else, do San Diego, different, so we can touch different communities. And we may fail in some places, but we'll be successful in some of them. So it's an idea. Don't forget food and wine, old music, and literature, they go together.
That's a very good point, and thank you. And that's and boy, you were right on the dot on the time. So indeed, let's mix in the Portuguese culinary experiences, of course, with some good wine. And actually, Sam knows that we did that in a different manner, but we presented, and we just had a presentation. I was a little bit disappointed. A lot of it was down, and Melinda was there, and I appreciate it, but we just didn't have the numbers. I was comparing it to when Sam was here. I think Sam's presentation, we had 75 people present. It was really a huge success. Then we had a private dinner that our good friend Lucianoia, would do for a few people that knew the author well, and it was a nice event. I know Luis attended some of those events as well, and so we were able to have. We had 22 people, 8 of them were students, and some other people from the community, but it was a big drop. I know it was the very first one after the pandemic, and it seems like people are still afraid of going out, and it's just really rough. And even our OLI program about the history of the Azores, this course that I'm doing on Portuguese history, Azorian history, cultural and culinary, and I end this. It's 4 sessions, and I ended with the recipes and the history behind it. I've done alcatra, I have done torresmos, and I'm going to do kalvs next time. But we wanted to do it in person, and we only had 7 people registered. And the director of the program contacted me and said, "You want to go back online?" Because I'd done it for 1 year online. And I said, "Well, I'd really like to do it in person because I'm at Fresno State these 2 days. I'd love to do it." And she said, "Well, we only have 7 people who have signed up, and we thought we'd turn it into online." And I said, "Okay, let's try it." And now it went from 7 to 37. So there's a lot of things, and I think that the pandemic has changed the world, and sometimes we in the Portuguese American community don't want to acknowledge that it did change, and it has indeed changed some of our things. So thank you all. I have a page and a half of notes, lots of good ideas. I hope that we can work on some of these. If Bruma Publications and PBBI, essentially it's all PBBI, if Fresno State, I should say, we have a wonderful we have a wonderful experience at Fresno State that all of you know because all of you have met him, which is our president being not Portuguese, being a Mexican immigrant, but with a PhD in Portuguese. And so speaks Portuguese, probably the only university professor in the United States has a PhD in Portuguese, and is really in tune to our community. And he will do all that it takes. We just have to supply some of the ideas and, of course, a little bit of the funding as well. So thank you all. I appreciate it. Keep on writing, please. Write, and write. Luis, write, and write. You hear what I'm saying? I'm inviting myself to write the preface for the next book, Luis. So let's publish. Bruma will publish it gladly. So just get it all together, and Bruma will publish it gladly. Sam, keep on writing and keep on sending the poems in the morning so I can have something to look forward to besides the god awful news. And Melinda, we're looking forward to the Queen of Saudade. I love that title. Angela, of course, Angela and I contact her all the time because of all the different projects we're involved in. And Anthony, we hope to, I would love to do, and end it with that, I'd love to do a writers conference, a Portuguese American writers conference at Fresno State. I'm working on that. I'm hoping to see if I can get some funding, and I'd like to do a California Portuguese American writers conference of everything from children's literature to poetry and fiction, and bring us all together for about 2 days at Fresno State. Let's see if I can get
Great
Flat
idea.
to buy into it.
Great.
Thank you
Great
all.
idea.
Appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you. And
you.
thank you all for joining us. We'll start tomorrow at 10 o'clock, the third day of the Luz American Education Foundation conference. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Thank you for your
Denise.
time.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye.